Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Inspiring Others to be Science Advocates. My name is Suzanne Folks, and I'm Vice President of Communications at Research America, a nonprofit advocacy alliance dedicated to making research to improve health a higher national priority. We're thrilled to partner with the Society for Neuroscience to bring you today's webinar, which is the third in a series of 4 joint webinars with the Society. Thank you, SFN, for your support and for hosting the webinar on Neuroline. Before I introduce today's speakers, I want to let you know that you have the opportunity to submit questions by typing it into the questions pane. Please indicate which speaker should respond to your question. Also, you can adjust the volume on your computer in the audio panel on your screen. You may submit your questions anytime during the presentation. We will collect these and try to address as many as possible during the audience Q&A session at the end of today's presentations. We have 3 outstanding speakers for today's webinar. Dr. Monica Linden is a senior lecturer at Brown University and an early career policy ambassador for the Society for Neuroscience. Cynthia Gibbs is the founder of Science Pub RVA. Dr. Rick Karnesky is the co-boss of Nite East Bay and a principal member of the technical staff at Sandia National Laboratories in Hydrogen and Materials Science. So now I'll turn it over to Dr. Monica Linden to kick off today's webinar. Monica?
Hi, thank you for having me here today. As a senior lecturer at Brown, I primarily work with the undergraduate students. So what I'm going to talk about today is really going to focus on how to inspire students to engage in advocacy and outreach, and really how to help them become a better communicator of science so that they can get others excited about science as well. Again, because I work in the classroom, and I assume many of you listening have students as well, I'm going to talk about how I do this within my classroom, and also how I inspire other students and help them to become advocates for science outside of my class. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about working with really young students. So first, I want to talk about why I do this in my classroom. And one thing is that I find teaching science communication in the classroom really aligns with many of the learning objectives that we already have for many of our neuroscience and life science classes. So on the right here, you can see how the advocacy-based learning activities that I use in one of my classes, Neurobiology of Learning and Memory, align with those course goals. The Neurobiology of Learning and Memory class, I would say, is an intermediate level small lecture class, about 25-ish students. And the students are second semester sophomores, primarily juniors, and some seniors. So they do already have an introductory level of background, which means my learning objectives are really about those higher order critical thinking skills. And one of the learning objectives for my class is communicating science. And I use these activities where they work more on outreach and advocacy-based type communications to meet the learning goal of enhancing their abilities to communicate science. I also have a goal around interpreting results, and I feel like these types of activities really help them with data interpretation. I don't have a synthesizing results learning objective for that class, but if you do, you can have the students do these same kind of activities where they synthesize across papers or projects that they're doing in the classroom. And I also have a goal around evaluating different neuroscience tools and techniques. And I find that these activities give the students the opportunity to talk about different experimental tools that they may use in a lab-based portion of the course, or that they may read about in different papers that they study in the class. So on the left, I have 3 kind of example assignments, but it says mock and real assignments, and I want to say what I mean about that. I believe that all of these assignments are completely authentic opportunities for the students to work on advocacy and science communication. However, they don't necessarily have the personal experience to write about their own work. So when we can, we would do what I call real assignments, which are based on the students' actual activities. So either actual things they did through a lab in the class, or if it's a course-based undergraduate research experience, things that they actually did. or I'll talk later about some things I did with students who had completed honors theses. But what I do within this learning and memory class is what I call mock assignments, where they might pretend that they are the author of the paper that we read in class or that they worked on that project, and then they have the opportunity to write about that work. And so there are different types of activities that you can do in your classroom that will enhance the student's advocacy experience or enhance their ability to communicate science to a variety of audiences. These three I have here would be letter writing, possibly to a politician, or letter writing to another interest group. I'm going to show you the elevator pitches assignment, which is about how you would communicate with politicians. Or they could write, for example, a letter to the editor to reach to a broader population. I also do assignments where the students get to choose their own audience that they want to target. And my students will choose audiences from young children to their parents, to their grandparents, or their peers at their university that aren't scientists. So all of these assignments can be sculpted to deal with different audiences, and that really gets the students excited about thinking about how to get other people interested in science. Here I have the full assignment for the elevator pitch, and I'm going to highlight some points on it, but I give you basically the text here that I give to the students. But the points that I have on the left are really important. For any type of assignment that I do in the classroom where I'm really working on getting the students better at communicating their science to others, I want them to think about three things, and the most important is probably the audience. And I just mentioned these can be done with a variety of different audiences. But as the instructor, it's really important that you're clear with the students what you want that audience to be, or if they're choosing their own audience, that you're clear with them how they should be choosing that audience and that they're conveying that information to you. If there's not a clear audience, I've found that these types of assignments don't work in getting across those goals of getting the students excited about talking to that particular audience. And then the second thing that also has to be clearly presented by the instructor is the goal of the assignment. So for me, for example, for the goal of the elevator pitch, it's going to be to try to get money from that politician. If it's a letter to the editor, it might be about getting the public to think about a particular science issue and get interested in that. I also spend time working with my students on making sure they're brief, because we want to make sure our students are, the people receiving the information from the students are excited, and you don't want to be too long-winded. Also, brevity really helps the students think about using scientific jargon and which details are extraneous, and really helps them to become much better at communicating science to everybody else. And the last point on there is that it's really helpful to provide examples. So if you read through this elevator pitch on the right, it says that I provided my own example of an elevator pitch using my authentic research experience from my PhD. So for those not familiar, an elevator pitch is a very short speech that's meant to last about the time of an elevator ride. So in this case, they want to imagine that they're in the elevator with a particular politician, like their congressman, and they want to convey the important parts about a particular aspect of science research and then ask them for money to fund that research. This example is one of those fake assignments, because here they're going to pretend that they worked on one of the projects from a paper that we read in the class. And I let them choose which paper they were most interested in talking about for this assignment. You'll notice that I was clear about the audience. I'm also clear about the goal, which was raising the money. And I also mentioned in there that they cannot use any jargon in their assignment. I also encourage them to use a metaphor or an analogy, which I think is really important for getting the students to do any kind of science outreach or science advocacy, is that they're really good at finding metaphors or analogies that their audience can relate to. And for this, they have to keep it very, very brief as well. If you're going to do something like this, I did provide a rubric that you can use to score this, because I think as an instructor, when I was first thinking through this, I was intimidated about how I would grade these types of assignments. So here I provide a rubric for the elevator pitch. And again, I'm really just looking, did they meet the goal? Did they highlight the research and then ask for the money? And then was it appropriate for the audience? And this is the one that can be hardest for the students, because they really have a hard time detaching from the jargon. But here, we really give them that opportunity to learn about how to get other people excited about neuroscience and neuroscience research. And then I do score them on brevity as well. That's just one example of the types of assignments that I've done in the classroom. I also wanted to mention some things I've done outside of the classroom in different contexts where I come in contact with students at my university and also at other universities. So this is a picture of a group of students who had completed their honors theses. These were graduating seniors, and they are all working on doing some letter writing. They were using the Society for Neuroscience's platform for contacting their politicians, and they were doing what I would call a real assignment because they were all writing about the research they did for their honors thesis and why NIH and NSF funding was important for that research. I've also done things at undergraduate conferences where I've educated people on different aspects of advocacy, but I've also helped them to create tweets where they at their politicians, or creating videos where this is what the society actually did during Neuroscience Hill Day, where people made videos about the importance of education, and I helped, of funding neuroscience, and I helped people create those and think about what should be in there. So there's lots of different types of advocacy work that students can get excited about, especially because in a lot of cases they're much better at social media than some of us might be. This, again, is really just for your own reference. It's how I did the letter writing session. I really made sure that I worked them through all the steps really easily. I put this slide up, let them go to it, and they could click on everything to find out who the representatives were, get a sample letter, edit it, and get it sent out quickly. And you can actually see the map below. It's a little bit hard to see, but in about a half an hour or 45 minutes, they contacted, I think, 22 unique members of Congress with 25 or so different letters being sent to those members. They all contacted their own congressmen, so we contacted people really across the country. So it was a really fun activity to do that didn't really take much time at all, but also taught them how easy science advocacy can be, and it was also something they could share with other people. I mean, in my remaining time, I just wanted to talk about some work I've done with really young students instead of my own students. In the top two pictures, I'm showing you an outreach activity I did at a preschool. And I do hear about people doing outreach with elementary school, but this one I went to talk to a group of 3 to 6-year-olds. I brought them a plasticized brain that they got to see. And while maybe not all of them fully understood what was going on, I did try to make sure that they were excited about science, and they asked some really excellent questions. It was great to hang out with the really little kids and talk about the brain. But again, I just want to stress that the importance is really figuring out what your audience is and what your goals are. So in this case, because my audience was these little kids and my goal was just to get them excited about science, I focused on things that they understood. So we talked about why the brain was important, mostly in terms of our senses and motor output, but I framed it all around why we need to wear helmets to protect our brain, because that's something they understand because they all wear helmets if they go out on their bikes or their tricycles. And that worked really well with that particular group. And also I had to keep it really brief because they were 3-year-olds, so they had very short attention spans. I also left them with the activity that you can see in the other picture where they're wearing those brains on their heads. So that's something they can take home, and then they can share what they learned with their siblings and with their parents to share that enthusiasm for science. In the bottom picture there, I was meeting with high schoolers on a Women in STEM Day. So again, it was about getting them excited about science, and I really made sure to keep on that message of what I do in science and how much fun it is to go out there and do neuroscience. I'm going to end with that, but I did want to also quickly mention that I am a school committee member in my town. I ran for office last November. I found that people were really receptive to having a scientist as a political leader, and I'm happy to take any questions on that in the question and answer session at the end of the webinar today. So thank you all.
Thank you, Monica. You gave a terrific presentation on ways to engage scientists, but also others in your community in fun and interesting ways to help them to learn and appreciate science much more than they do now. So I will now transition to our next speaker, Cynthia Gibbs is our next presenter, and I will now turn it over to Cynthia, who's founder of Science Pub RVA.
Hello, everyone. Delighted to be here. I think we probably have some people who are thinking of organizing science communication events for their institutions, and maybe also some individuals who are thinking about how they might want to individually be involved. And I'd like to encourage you to think about live science events, specifically the Science Cafe model or Science in a Bar model, maybe not a highly produced event like a TEDx, but a thought-out and informal event that would be meaningful to both you and to the people who show up. People love having a good time, and that's what Science Pub is. It primarily attracts people who think hearing about and discussing ideas is their idea of fun, and they are very keen. I mean, I have to say, people are hungry for meaningful experiences, community connection, learning about what you do, why you do it, why it matters. And it can be a lot of fun for you as well to connect with them on that. So Science Pub RVA started as a science cafe. We've kind of grown now. Once you hit a certain number, it's hard to maintain that model. The Science Cafe model, the idea is that you would have an exchange of information. Rather than delivering a talk, you would perhaps lead a conversation. And so the exchange, the questions, the dialogue would be the meat of the evening. Now that we're a larger event, our average this year is actually 93 people, we're really in a Q&A mode, because once you're above 50 or 65, you can't be a true science cafe. But it's still maintaining the idea that the Q&A is where the fun is at, and so we make sure that the public shapes the conversation. They have as much time as the expert. So the way I'm structuring things, when I have a scientist, they speak for up to 20 minutes. If it's a scholar, like a historian or a philosopher of science, 30 minutes, and then we would have 30 to 40 minutes of Q&A. And the other thing I'll highlight on this is that, of course, when you start any endeavor, knowing why you're doing it, who you want in the room, why do you want them, that all makes it's going to be what propels you forward and shapes how you decide to structure your event, either your series or your single event. And one thing I'd like to highlight is that it isn't just the content, but to think about when you think about what you will give them, think about the takeaways that are emotional, the experience, the feelings they'll have. One person wrote on one of our exit surveys, "You guys are so much fun." And that's an important part of the evening, and making sure people feel good about scientists in our community. Another reaction from the crowd that I got on a recent survey was that they most love the crowd's reaction when we learn something unexpected. And of course, that aligns with what we know about how people learn. And as you read more about science communication and your training, I just recommend thinking about that. One of the things when you're working with live events is to think about not just the language that that the science communicators are going to have in the venue itself, but how you are going to talk about your event and attract people to it. So having playful language is part of the draw to get people to come to your event, and not every organizer or speaker is necessarily comfortable with using, let's say, less sciencey language and more marketing type language. It might be something you have to negotiate. I had a quote from someone recently. It said, "I almost didn't come because the topic didn't sound so interesting, but it was great." And that was someone who had come before, so we were lucky on that front. This gives you an idea of some of the things that I prioritize and measure. One of my goals is to have science thought of as part of the Richmond culture. And so I'm interested in attracting people who aren't that into science. And this is my statistics from last year, our 5th season of Science Pub. And part of that is by the content. about 50% of the audience is coming for a specific topic, and generally, and 50% are coming because for the general opportunity to connect with science. Very few people are coming for the specific speaker or the specific venue. And of course, art, science topics draw a lot of interest, as does brain and human health. So you guys are lucky that you are working in fields that people already have a lot of interest in connecting with. I'm keen on having a diverse age range, and I'm fortunate to be able to achieve that. And I think that's part of the continued interest in the public. So when you're thinking about a live event, I'd like you to think about what makes you happy and value those things and be playful. So this is where you can the speakers can have fun, the organizers can have fun, and the public will come away with some of those positive feelings you want them to have. So you might have to loosen up your speakers a little bit by talking with them about format or other add-ons that you could have that would make for an enjoyable evening and increase the engagement on the topic of the night. I've tried something called Art Science Nightcaps. I'm going to jump forward real fast to this slide. And I had fun with them. It worked for several events, but I was not able to sustain it. So not everything is a success, and you have to keep trying or just try different things. It can be not so intense. So there's a picture here in the upper right. It's a trivia. There's trivia there. I didn't invent the trivia. This is from the Department of Energy. So there are things out there that exist that you can do in a very low-key way to add to people's fun and the draw for them to come out and spend their night of leisure with you. We've had programs that have had, many of them are one speaker, some of them have multiple speakers, even lightning talks in the 3-minute thesis talk. The formats have been, sometimes they've been trivia. So this presenter or discussion leader will ask a question and then do an explainer. What is the answer after the audience makes an answer, and explain the why behind that or the how we know that. That's a fun way to do it. Interjecting intermissions actually can create wonderful Q&A discussions in the second half. So think about what makes you happy, value those things. Science Pub has been able to partner in several different ways with different organizations, the simplest of which is with PBS NOVA. This was before I became part of the Community Ideas Station. The NOVA team had a call for having a material science innovation cafe, and they were looking for partners throughout the country. And so I was one of 30 cafes selected for that, and that was involved just showing a PBS clip about their upcoming program, and then I had a local speaker from a university, a material scientist, and some hands-on activities. World Science Festival again showed one of their productions, live streamed it, and had local speakers then do the Q&A afterwards. The Smithsonian Institute actually had a traveling exhibit with one of our local libraries was one of the recipients of that grant and tour. And so I reached out to them when I read that news, and we built a 3-part series of topics all about human evolution that were not held at the library but held at bars, and helped promote the exhibit happening at the library. Virginia Commonwealth University is the largest game in town. It's not the only group I go to for speakers and discussion leaders, but I've been fortunate to partner with Dr. Karen Rader. She is a historian of science and runs the Science, Technology, and Society program there. And through an NSF-funded grant that she got, we're doing some informal science research. And so we have had 6 so far of 8 STS speakers come present at Science Pub. So that's been very fun. And let's see. I think we've got 2 different types of people in the audience, people who are thinking that they want to speak at a live event, as well as people who want to organize them. I'll say that since I'm not affiliated with a scientific organization, I have a lot of freedom. So I tend to choose to invite individuals rather than working with PR departments. within the universities or other scientific organizations in town. Sometimes I'm hunting for someone to talk about a specific topic, or it's just maybe I haven't had someone in cosmology, and so then I think, oh, I'm going to find someone in that field and then work with them to decide what to speak about. And in this way, Science Pub is an atmosphere for practice and exchange. So most of my speakers are not actually folks who have a lot of experience doing science communication outside of an academic environment. And so I'm always looking for people willing to collaborate on focusing on what the content goals for the evening will be, and be open to being playful with the format. Oh, this image is from last June when we hit our 5-year mark, and those are the 45 speakers we had by that time. Marketing is it's like own big animal, and I know I was asked to talk about it today. So I think what's important really is to have some sort of branding, fun image, and language. And then word of mouth is going to do the most for you. I spent, I would have to say, a year networking around the community, going to other events, arts events, history events, innovation, tech events, just a whole bunch of things, talking to different people in the community about Science Pub as I was getting it going. And that can serve you very well. And community calendars, very labor intensive, but it pays off in getting new audiences. And I'll highlight meetup.com again. If you're not familiar, go check it out. It could be a real resource for finding new audiences. Let's see, and because it's such a big thing, if I were doing Science Pub again, I would not be doing everything by myself. I would be looking for a team, volunteers or interns that could help me move things forward. So Science Pub became a member of, or a program of, the local NPR PBS station at about its 3.5 mark, which is wonderful to be part of such a prestigious organization. And that has impacted us just in a few ways. The most significant is sustainability. Simply science cafes, the independent ones, and even ones affiliated with organizations, they have difficulty sustaining themselves. So I was very grateful when a couple who had been going to Science Pub for 3.5 years made it possible for the station to take me on and keep the program going. Also, recognition, locally, because I'm now affiliated with that, has created a lot of, recognition. And then also nationally, Science Pub being part of some of the Science Matters initiative, which is underneath the umbrella of the Community Ideas Station, has, anyway, our role played a little part in them winning an Innovation and Community Impact Award. Science Pub is part of the Science Matters initiative, which is under the community engagement activity. So we are constantly working with, partnering with organizations throughout the community at different levels in many different ways. Our audience size has grown on average 10 a year from the beginning. So it started at 48 from year one, and now we're up to 93. And we've had as many as 130 people come to event. And if you're not familiar with science cafes, when you get this deck again, there'll be a link from the very beginning I should have highlighted. You can click on the Nova Science Cafe Network and the Cafe Scientifique Network. And here's my mini list of resources and inspiration for you. Oh, there it is. This is the Nova Science Cafe Network and Cafe Scientifique. And of course, no one's anywhere without cheerleaders, and here were mine. So Bridget Bender, who helped me design the logo and language for Science Pub, the Camel, which was my venue for a solid year before I started moving things around town, the Science Festival Alliance, and Debbie Mickle, John Survey, Mr. and Mrs. Joel Dugan are local people who I just would never have gotten past year one without these cheerleaders. I hope you find yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia, for your terrific suggestions, thinking about the takeaways for the audience with the Science Pub to be sure that they have an enjoyable experience. And sharing unexpected news, as you said, and information, and to make it fun using trivia and humor. Those were all great suggestions, so thank you. So now we move on to our last speaker, Dr. Rick Karnesky, who will talk more about Nerd Nite and Nerd Nite East Bay. Rick?
Thanks, Suzanne. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my science first. I received my Bachelor's of Science in Engineering and Applied Science from Caltech, my PhD in Material Science and Engineering from Northwestern, and I'm now a principal member of the technical staff at Sandia National Laboratories in Livermore, California, where I work in the Hydrogen and Material Science Department. But none of that training as a scientist really prepared me for what I'm here to discuss today, which is Nerd Nite East Bay, that I co-founded and helped run. I had incorrect assumptions about interacting with the public, and while I'd like to think I know what to do when something unexpected happens in the lab, the things that could go wrong in science communications are completely different. I hope that some of the stories I share will help you grow and maintain a public audience of your own. So Nerd Nite East Bay is a lecture in a bar series. It's sort of similar to Science Pub in that respect. We are part of an international network of events. As I said, I'm a professional scientist. The Nerd Nite Network was also started by a professional scientist. We like to feature science communicators regularly. Here I am with Apollo 9 astronaut Rusty Schweikart. But in any given month, we'll have talks from not only one or more scientists, but also historians, competitive beard growers, and pretty much anyone who has an interesting talk to share. Partly because of this, our events often attract very large audiences. In Oakland, where I help run events, we've jumped from a punk rock club to the Bruin View movie theater that you see here to a Latin dance club. Our events happen regularly for about 6 years. We've hosted 62 monthly events and a few special events. About 160 people with broad backgrounds show up on really good nights that balloons to about 250 people. Our emails go out to 1,600 subscribers in the Bay Area. On the global Nerd Nite list, that's about 30,000. These numbers didn't come easy. At our very first event, one presenter canceled due to jet lag. In the movie theater that you saw on the last slide, we had a projector fail. One of our most stressful nights, the venue double booked our space. A Bay Area tech company was planning on hosting a private soiree for their elite reviewers when we were planning to be hosting our lectures. We were faced with the dilemma of doing the program in half of the space, so we had to remove our comfy cabaret-style seating and give people the option of sitting on the floor or receiving a refund. Not a single person took that refund. That night, we hosted Kelly Wintersmith, a parasitologist. She planned to show samples of parasites we had borrowed from the California Academy of Science. Not having space in our theater to host this setup, she began setting up in the lobby. So just behind her here, you can see the rails for the ADA ramp, and the light on the right-hand side of the slide is from the theater's front door. Imagine a string of dozens of elite reviewers expecting a pleasant evening of wine and cheese while watching Jon Favreau's Chef, encountering the smell of formaldehyde when they first opened that door, and then coming in and talking with a scientist about parasitic worms that infect California killifish. And those elite reviewers ended up loving it. If there's one thing I want everyone to take away from this brief talk, it's something similar that Cynthia shared, which is that the best way to engage the public is to get off campus and to go to where the public hangs out. Some of the most successful science communication doesn't reek of science communication. So I'll detail some of the logistics of running these public education events in general, discuss the topic diversity that I think is part of our own secret sauce at Nerd Nite, and close on the importance of experimentation. So regarding logistics, my most useful piece of advice is something that Cynthia also said, which is to get help. It takes me about 20 hours per month to run these events, and I have great help. So this is Rebecca Cohen with me. So Rebecca Cohen is my long-running co-organizer in Oakland. She's not a scientist. She trusts a feminist webcomic and hosts a podcast. Having someone who thinks differently than I do, who has different talents, recruits different speakers, and attracts a different audience has been hugely helpful. Rebecca and I have also delegated necessities like ticket checking, video recording, streaming, and some of the promotions and social media outreach. We also have a very strong local network in the Bay Area of colleges, museums, libraries, science festivals, hacker spaces, and other lecture events that have helped us, both with speaker suggestions from their own staff and from guests who they've had present, but also in promotion to the audience. That same night, we had a talk on parasites. Our Oakland Public Librarian, Sharon McKellar, gave a talk on children's books. And the Oakland Public Library has started preparing a reading list of books related to the 3 different talks that we host each month, issuing library cards. It's been a very strong, healthy engagement. The idea for that engagement actually came to us from another event in the Nerd Nite network, and that network has been a fantastic resource for us. Chris Balakrishnan, who's now an East Carolina University professor, hosted the very first Nerd Nite in Boston as a graduate student about 15 years ago. It moved to New York, where Nerd Nite big boss Matt Wasowski brought the events, and they sort of shopped it around the world, and now there are dozens of events all over the world. All of these event organizers have helped me immensely. Nerd Nite's certainly not the only network out there. As you prepare your own science events, you might look at the resources that some of these have. This list is far from comprehensive. In addition to Nerd Nite, I want to sort of single out Taste of Science, because they're running public events in a couple dozen US cities from April 22nd to April 28th. I've attended a ton of these events. Those with the network tend to have name recognition that makes negotiating with a venue easier. They also provide an event template so the audience knows what to expect. Many networks provide guides on getting started. You can even read some online without needing to be a member of their network. Our network has also provided insights into statistics for me. So here's a figure on how different Nerd Nites around the world price their events. Here's a second figure that shows that a regular event attendance is correlated to how regular those events actually are. You may hear more about this kind of thing at the June 1st webinar in this series, Measuring Advocacy Outcomes. This isn't to say a network is wholly necessary. Some of the most creative events I've attended have been the product of a really passionate person doing their own thing. That passion is really good for both organizers and the scientists and other educators they host. Which brings me to our second of 3 topics, which is topic diversity. There is some special magic that happens when we bring together 3 very different people, each of whom may drag some of their own friends and fans to the event. Since I'm speaking to the SFN, I've cherry-picked one of our programs that featured a neuroscientist. So kicking off this night, we had Dr. Patrick House present. Patrick received his PhD from Stanford under Professor Robert Zapolsky. He had previously given a Nerd Nite San Francisco talk on research on how T. Gandhi changes the brains of rats, cats, and people. After receiving his PhD, Patrick took some of that Nerd Nite experience and became a popular science author. At this night's show, Dr. House discussed the neuroscience of lying. But to be honest, there weren't a ton of people there to see Patrick. You see, everyone was there to see Eric. They were really excited about Eric Chang. Eric had been on Good Morning America and on Adam Savage's Tested because he flew quadcopters into volcanoes, shooting really amazing video. The buzz around his appearance meant most of our seats were full that night. Our third and final talk came from a current PhD student, Sarah Gold McBride. She discussed her thesis work on the history, science, and pseudoscience of human hair. I don't know what reception Sarah's used to at a conference. When I was a graduate student, I looked forward to maybe 24 people in the audience. Sarah spoke to about 200 that night, all in rapt attention. Her talk touched on some of the ways academics of the past had drawn some dubious conclusions that touched on some of the issues of racism that are still of great local interest in Oakland today. My favorite part of the event is something I heard Cynthia say as well, which was someone saying, I really didn't think that hair science could be interesting, but wow, that act of discovery is why we do this. So we've been called the college radio of lecture series. They bring professional scientists along with graduate students, early career scientists into the same room and provide them this great platform to experiment. And that brings me to our final topic, experimentation. To broaden our reach, keep our programs fresh, and provide new experience and escalation for our audience, we like to mix things up a bit. We first started by running pop-ups at other museums like the Chabot Space and Science Center that you see here. I really like Chabot, but it's kind of up the hill and out of the way. Not enough people go to it. Museums often love to let someone with slightly different sensibilities and audiences come in as a guest event, so definitely consider them as good partners. And of course, this is a great opportunity to cross-pollinate. From there, we started more and more offbeat, non-traditional science communication events, such as on the USS Hornet aircraft carrier, which, in addition to a long history in military service, was a recovery vessel for the Apollo 11 mission. It's now a museum. So we visited the ship, we met the docents and crew and talked, and then we just started swearing. We just knew we had to do something on the ship that not nearly enough people go to. We were just amazed by the depth of knowledge and the passion of the curators and docents. It would be a logistical nightmare and expensive and risky to do as an event, but it would also just be so amazing. So we looked for every piece of tangential content that we could add that could still honor that space. We riffed on it in ways that normally wouldn't be surfaced by the museum. So we had a historian talk about recruiting advertisements of aerospace companies in the 50s and 60s. And again with the drones. We had them flying off the deck of the ship and scanning it to build a real-time 3D model. And we invited a company that makes horrifically lifelike trauma training robots for the military, have those robots to writhe and bleed in the trauma care bays of the ship. Over 1,000 attendees came out that night, which brings me back to this photo of me with Apollo 9 astronaut Rusty Schweikart. Rusty gave a really great talk on asteroid defense that night, and you can see that we both enjoyed it. But what you can't see is that my lab coat is hiding the fact that I split my pants by jumping up on stage at the start of the event, and I'm hiding the fact that my underpants are hanging out from my audience. As I said, I was not prepared for how, when you run events, at some point anything and everything can go wrong. But it is also so memorable and rewarding personally, so I'm grateful. Before we jump to Q&A, I'd especially like to thank my co-conspirators, Bart and Keish, who helped with that event and with this talk.
Well, thank you, Rick. And I will say that some of the information you shared was quite interesting, especially the last part, being able to be flexible with any last-minute glitches and knowing how to partner with those outside the scientific community to help spread the word, but also to utilize their talents and recommendations for making the events like Nerd Night as successful as possible. So now we're going to switch to the Q&A session of today's webinar. As a reminder, you can submit written questions through the questions pane, and we will get to all of the questions that are posted for the remainder of this webcast. So I do have a question from Danny. This one is for Monica. Monica, what do you say to encourage your fellow scientists to become advocates, especially women? And what are the specific perspectives that only current scientists can provide to policymakers? So this one is for Monica.
Great, thank you for that question. I think many of the scientists now really do understand the importance of engaging in advocacy. I think talking to people about, thinking about where their funding comes from and what would happen if they didn't get that funding is a really good way to inspire people. But also I found that since the election in 2016, people have been paying attention to this, and it doesn't take much to get people interested. What I find is really helpful for keeping them interested is showing them how easy some of these advocacy efforts can be, especially if you're working through the Society for Neuroscience. They are really excellent at providing a lot of support around advocacy. They have a ton of resources on their site, and they also make it super easy to contact your congressman. They have tools for all of this. And so, yeah, I really just remind people about their money and then show them how easy it is. For women, I think it's also just about showing them the representation. At the highest levels in faculty, women are still not well represented when it comes to in neuroscience and life science department. Just not enough women at the highest levels, but also there's just not enough women in government when you look at local government, state government, and nationally. So just continuing to point that out, and then again just show them how easy it is. The perspectives that only scientists can provide to policymakers, I think one of the things there is, again, looking at the numbers and how few congressmen have degrees in science. I think that's a key piece of it, is just scientists need to be represented at all levels. But then it's really our background and our critical thinking skills that as scientists we've been trained to look at information, analyze it carefully, look at it very impartially, ask the right questions about it. And we have that training that we can bring to any policy issue. So reminding people the fundamental things that they've learned about problem solving and decision making throughout their entire careers, and how as scientists they are uniquely qualified to bring that to policy decisions. And then of course when it comes to making decisions about things like climate change or healthcare, we might have the particular background, but I really think it's the way that we think about things. And when I ran for office, I found that that's what people were most interested in, was that they knew that they could trust that I was going to bring an analytical mind to decision making. So I think stressing that is really helpful.
Thank you, Monica. I have a question from Liz, and I guess this one could be for either speaker. How about addressing potentially controversial topics during public events? Is it safer to stay away from them, or do you charge in head-on? For example, climate change, evolution, etc. And this is for
this
anyone.
is Rick. I can engage in that, I suppose. First, I would challenge the concept a little bit that those are really controversial events, at least within the scientific community. So as far as engaging in political issues that still have a very clear scientific message, I think that we need to go for it. There's a different kind of controversial topic, which is something that may not yet have any sort of scientific consensus. Oftentimes, we may get pitches from people that publish in kind of lower tier journals with some pretty out there ideas. And I think giving those kinds of people a wider platform must be done with caution. I'm not opposed to risk, but if they have already brave the hazards of peer review, I think they could brave the hazards of the public.
I'd like to add on. So with regards to controversial topics, from my experience at Science Pub, I have to say the audience is there. They're not there to contest the speaker. It's not the academic environment. So they're not contentious. And I have had a couple of controversial topics like human evolution. I have not taken on climate change just because I just haven't found the angle I want to go with. But frankly, the most contentious moment we ever had was someone in the audience upset about eelgrass. So, the audience will surprise you about what it is that it interests them or that they think is contentious. But definitely something that has an ethics component if people are keen to have that discussion. So if you're going to have a controversial topic, and especially if it has ethics, make sure you do know what are your goals for the science content as well, so that you get that across, because the audience is going to move you in the Q&A to where they want to go.
Thanks, Cynthia. And we have another question from Liz. What are you doing to draw underserved or underrepresented audiences to these events? Do you offer options for tickets, to offer free tickets for some attendees? And I guess Cynthia or Rick could answer this one.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So in Oakland, our advance tickets cost $5. They're not really meant to be a barrier to entry. We also have the benefit of a very diverse community out here. And I think the thing that is most likely to get that diverse community to attend is to host topics that are of interest to them. So when we've hosted talks on the history of the Black Panthers in Oakland, that fills up seats with people that scientists don't tend to interact with all the time. So, I mean, we're educational events. We're not trying to make money, and the price of admission is cheaper than a beer.
Right. So our Science Pub is free. We might have to move to a low ticket like you guys do at Nite just because we are having such fantastic no-show rates. And that's something you'll experience when you have live events. And so, yeah, we do work hard behind the scenes to try and draw diverse audiences. It is a challenge. It will always be a challenge. The content is the driver and sometimes the speaker. So that's where you should focus.
Great, thank you. And I have a question from Anna for Monica. How excited are students typically at the beginning when you start to engage them on advocacy and science outreach, and how do they change or improve their science communication following your course? Do they tend to follow up or share examples of what they've been doing?
Yeah, so there's some mix. A lot of the students are really already excited about science outreach, and my university has a lot of opportunities for them to engage in that. I think what they pick up on in the course is how to be more effective in that, and they really enjoy learning those skills and being able to bring it to, for example, we have a brain day here, so they can bring their communication skills to that, and sometimes they do report that back to me. In terms of the advocacy, I don't think it's on the radar for the undergraduate students, so I think they appreciate me showing that to them. And then once they see how easy it is, they see it's something that they can engage in, and especially for the ones that are going to go on into PhD programs, it's an opportunity to get them engaging now and then to continue to engage throughout their scientific career. And with the honors thesis students, I did have several students email me when they did get the letters back from their congressmen. So one of the nice things about writing to your congressman is that they tend to send you letters back, and they were super excited that someone did pay attention to what they sent out. So I think they do enjoy it.
And how do you, a follow-up question, how do you encourage scientists and students to work within their institutions to encourage from the top down more public outreach and advocacy?
That's a good question. So again, we already have a lot at our university, so there's not as much top-down for them to do, but I think what I advise for them is to kind of find more people to share their interest with and to start up their own things. So we have had students start out their own outreach activities, and just pointing them to different resources within the university to get any resources that they might need for that, and to help them make connections. And also for us, because we have a medical school and we have graduate students and undergrads, helping them work across the different levels to draw in students from all the different parts of the university.
Great. And this is a question for all speakers. How do you leverage social media in promoting not only these events, but also in keeping the engagement continuing after these events, during and after, before, during, and after? And this applies to advocacy as well.
So because Science Pub is a part-time gig, I can't do that. There's not a lot of effort I can put into keeping the engagement going. I'd say the one thing I do is I use each platform differently. So for Instagram, I do very little posting, but for instance, I always post a picture of the speaker with a bio that emphasizes, that also includes information about what they like to do for fun, or that they biked across the country. So emphasizing the human aspect, and it's normally a picture, if they'll give me one, of them doing something, running or baking, something non-sciencey. Twitter I use primarily really for science communication, so I'm using it in DM, but also in the community about events, other science happenings, sharing resources and links and cool things to do. And Facebook I'm not on so much anymore, even though the event is listed there. And I have to say, Twitter, the GIFs, I have to say, for when you're doing marketing, I'm finding that using GIFs rather than creating unique graphics is working much better for me for getting new audience members.
And I could add to that a little bit. Each of these social media platforms is a business, and so as you grow your audience, they tend to see you as a source for ad revenue, which is fine. We do pay for some ads or event announcements to get the word out. I think most of our event communications happen through local Bay Area calendars as well as our email list. But we do like leveraging Facebook in particular for what we call extra credit. So we will post follow-up links about each of the 3 talks. We'll months later, if a speaker comes out with a book or something, we'll tell our audience about that as well. So I think that maintaining relationships with your speakers is also really important, and social media can help with that.
For some of the advocacy things, when I teach about using Twitter, we do talk about what hashtags might be helpful, and if it's for a particular event like the SFN Hill Day, they have some hashtags that they recommend, but making sure that you're using hashtags that are applicable. So if it's a particular disease that your research is related to, including that in the hashtag. So we do a little bit of Twitter training, but mostly I just rely on the Society for Neuroscience's efforts around social media because they do such an excellent job with that, and you can find information about that on their advocacy webpage.
Thank you. So we have a couple of minutes left before we wrap up. Any parting words from the presenters for the audience today? Any other tips or suggestions you think might be helpful?
I think it's just really useful to let the public know that scientists are people too. So get out there, meet them on their own ground, and have fun.
Yeah, I would just say, oh, sorry. I would just say that when you're working with other people to get them excited about advocacy and outreach, just showing how easy it can be, providing as many resources as possible, and being enthusiastic is a great way to get people on board.
Yes, I would say bring your whole self. If you're going to do live events, try to bring your whole self to the event as much as possible within the parameters that your institution permits.
Well, thank you again for your great presentations and for your insights on how to build stronger relationships with non-scientists and local communities. And I want to thank you again for sharing your time with us today, and for everyone who participated in today's webinar. The webinar will be archived and posted online on the Society for Neuroscience website and Research America's website in the coming days. So if you know of others who would be interested in hearing and seeing the presentations, please let them know to go to Society for Neuroscience and or Research America's website. And we hope you found today's webinar useful as you consider building stronger relationships with local communities to generate robust public support for science. We encourage you to continue today's conversation with the Neuroline community afterwards. We also welcome your feedback through a brief evaluation that will come up immediately after the webinar. And if you have questions, we welcome them as well for the questions and comments. And again, thank you for your participation today to today's speakers and for those who participated in today's webinar. And again, please take a moment to take the post-webinar survey. Thank you.